So just going to be reviewing exactly what I think is the 5 tips that I wish I would have known before getting started as a landlord. And my first property, I turned 26 and I closed about a month later. So that was in 2017. So most of the time it is collecting rent, making sure everything's paid on time, paying water bills, things like that. That's most of the time things that I'm doing in accounting, making sure I have expenses accounted for and the account looks good, the rental property account. But these 5 tips here are things that I wish I would have known before getting started. And the first one was that you want to treat it like a business, right? It could definitely be treated as a hobby if you're not sure, but when you're playing with your own money, you're investing your own money, it's important to know exactly you are in control of how well it's going to go, right? You can't just be super lax about certain things. You want to treat it like a business. It is tougher when you're younger and you're buying property. I know my tenants, they were roughly my age when I closed. They asked if I was the property manager or I wasn't the owner of the property. And I've seen things where you just introduce yourself as a property manager, but I didn't find that as, that was a lie, so I didn't really think that'd be helpful or to start a relationship off with a lie or anything like that. So number 1, treat it as a business. You're in the business to provide the correct housing, but also you want to turn a profit at the end of the day as well, but you can still do it quality. You can still deliver a quality product. And I would not consider renting to family or friends. It may seem like a good idea, but when business and money is involved, things could go south somewhat quickly. So I personally wouldn't recommend folks, if it's your first property, to rent out units to family or friends. Some people might have good success with that, but that's something I wouldn't want to mix in regards to investment properties, at least. And I can remember the second night I owned the property, and the floor was completely vacant, and we left and went to a concert, and I was petrified I was gonna get phone calls just because I just started and we were doing the orientation the next day and going over a new lease and a new signing and where to pay rent and how to do that. But I was pretty prepared going into it, so I'm glad it worked out that way. Number 2 is to stick to the contract. When you do inherit tenants or you are starting off and you're screening tenants, you will have an agreement, typically a lease or a tenant at will agreement, whatever works for you. And you want to go review that with them when they are signing it, just because you want to stick to it, right? If you are including certain appliances, that is in there. When and how to pay rent, what happens if rent is late, the major points you want to review with them, because that is exactly what you were following. You can't just throw it out the window if you don't allow pets and they ask for a pet halfway through the agreement. You need to stick to what you have in there, because that document is in there to protect you. Some states are more friendly. Massachusetts is a very tenant-friendly state, but some states are very landlord-friendly. With Massachusetts, you want to make sure you cover everything. Things such as you could only collect first last security, and I believe it's a locked deposit, but it may be a pet deposit. You just want to make sure you're covering the law, and that document goes over everything in there, the contact information, all their emergency contact, exactly what they're paying for, the premises and things of that nature. So you definitely want to stick to the contract. Third is understand that CapEx will happen. It's inevitable. You always want to make sure you have reserves in play. And that's why I say when you buy that first property, ideally you want to have 6 months PITI bare minimum. So if the property was $300K and your down payment roughly on that, if it was FHA, $12,000, with closing is probably $18,000. I would recommend you probably have a good $12,000 saved away. That doesn't mean you're going to use that $12,000 immediately, but it just gives you some cushion, because you don't want to be in a spot where you have a repair that could be large for you, and it just eats up all your proceeds if you're just collecting rent and you're not actually putting that money in to reinvest in the CapEx or the repairs on the property. I know I had to do some heating work, and the bill came, I can't exactly what it was, but maybe $1,200, $1,400. That was pretty early on, and almost had a pretty big scare with with water in the sewer. One thing that you want to make sure you do is you need to let your tenants know especially with these older houses in Mass, is no, you can't flush tampons. That's something you can't do. They're not meant to be flushed down these toilets. So that's one thing, pretty gross, but you gotta review it if you're having female tenants, because that can cost you. And if you don't go over that in the lease, they could say they didn't know, and that could cost you a very large amount of money to fix something, because anything with water, I mean, that could just go wrong so quick, and you're eating up a ton of money that you could have went over if you just know exactly. You want to review that with them. I'd also recommend fixing things before they're at the end of the useful life. So that doesn't mean replace a roof. If it's only 10 years old, you could patch it most likely. But if you do have a turnover and you have an older vanity or something small, you can probably make some pretty good finishes on that property when you're turning it over that will likely increase the rent on the property. I would recommend making changes like that. Fourth would be understand the difference between functional and durable. When you are updating the property, typically during a turnover, you want to make it very tenant friendly. Since you're the owner of the property, you care about the property more than anyone else, even a property manager. They're managing hundreds of units, but if you're managing your own property, you're going to care more about every dollar you spend. You want to make sure it goes to good use. So when you're thinking about making changes to the property during a turnover, right, paint colors that appeal, that are modern, would make more sense than just doing a random paint scheme. And just even having the rooms the same color gives it a different feel than just random, orange in one room, blue in the other room, things of that nature. So if you can make it feel like its own home and make it very modern and still update it very nicely, you're gonna get the best bang for your buck in regards to when you rent out the property. You wanna make it modern, but you don't wanna make it too high end. Simple things that could be that are such as higher end appliances, things that, especially like a fridge with an electronic ice maker and anything you could do touchscreen, those can function very poorly, very quickly, just with they have so many more parts in there than a standard, a couple $100 fridge that you get that will last for a very long time. So you gotta think about, is it functional and durable? Is it okay if you have an older fridge if it still works? Yes, but you don't wanna let it go past the end of useful life. If it is a turnover, you wanna consider the new tenants moving in, what appliances you have there, and make sure they're working properly. It doesn't mean they all have to be the same color, although it does look nice if you get a deal on a set or anything like that. But think about, hey, would I want to live here? And if it's yes, most likely then I want to update it as I was living in that unit. Finally, the last tip is you are dealing with people. You do have tenants that you are working with, and you are renting out space to them, which is true. But you are just dealing with people at a level, and if they have concerns, you absolutely want to listen. They most likely are valid. Your goal is to provide the best experience possible when they are in the property, and to ensure that everything is kept up, everything's maintained and well functioning. And you do have the option to choose. For example, when, if you have rent that's a day or two late, how do you handle it? How do you approach it? Are you going to be super non by the book and you're gonna let it slide? Or there's better ways to approach it if you've had long-term tenants. And that's when things could get tricky. If it's a new tenant and you're not sure, you got to figure out, use your best judgment when you're doing the screening process. The screening process is critical because if you have long-term tenants and you do a great job screening, and you also provide the right experience when they're renting the property, you're very responsive to repair requests and things of that nature, it would most likely encourage them to stay longer, which is the goal. And another topic here would be almost like rent bumps, rent increases. I would most likely want to keep a property full than have it vacant for extended periods of time, since the vacancies will kill most of your gains very quickly. A month doesn't sound like a lot, but if your property's at $1,500 a month, that's roughly 30, that's not even 30, that's $50 a day. So every day it's vacant, that'd be $1,500 that you didn't fill that property. So keep in mind, you should be having vacancy as a part of when you're running your numbers, but still, you also want to make sure that you're just communicating with tenants, and the goal is to provide the best experience, and you want to make sure you're understanding when they do have concerns. So those are the 5 tips I wish I would have known before I got started. Hopefully you found it helpful, and any questions, feel free to drop a comment. I'll respond, and we'll take it from there. Take care.